If you were celebrating your 100th birthday, you'd want to have a bit of a party. And if you're going to have a party, you've got to get your toys out. Well, Mercedes are, and they've done just that. Not these. These, believe it or not, are just their ordinary toys that we're going to be playing with in a short while. They've kept all their best toys to themselves, and they're over there playing with them, right in the middle of Monaco. Mercedes have called this event the History of Passion, because passion was seen as the driving force behind the company. Here in Casino Square, some of the most famous Mercedes cars from the last 100 years will be put through their paces with 3 showpiece laps each of a carefully selected circuit. It's no accident that we're here in the Côte d'Azur, because this is where the brand Mercedes began, through the energy and enthusiasm of one Emil Jelinek. Jelinek was a customer of Daimler Motoren Gesellschaft, DMG, car builders from Cannstatt, with a passion for speed and cars. In 1900, Jelinek ordered a car from DMG, which, in his own words, had to be light, fast and good-looking, and more importantly, able to win the forthcoming races during Nice Week in 1901. To convince DMG of his seriousness, he ordered not just one car, but 36 in April of 1900. This figure amounted to a third of DMG's annual production and cost a then astonishing 550,000 gold marks. William Maybach, a pioneering engineer at DMG, built the car, powered by a 5.9-litre 4-cylinder engine installed at the front, developing 35 horsepower with a top speed of 100 kilometers an hour. The car was to compete in the sprint, long distance and hill climb trials. Jelinek had been deliberating for a long time on a name for his cars. He finally settled on the name Mercedes, after his daughter, who was born in 1889. During the race week in Nice from the 25th to the 29th of March 1901, new records and victories made headlines around the world, with the German car winning the most important competitions. The name was Mercedes, and the legend was born. These early victories marked the start of an unbelievable success story in motorsport, one which continues today. This story of passion is, in essence, what Mercedes is celebrating here, with a parade of cars from both the past and the present. There are some stunning cars here, and one thing for sure is that they can all trace their lineage back to this car. The oldest still existing Mercedes, the 40-horsepower Simplex. This car was the direct successor to the first Mercedes. It was built only 1 year later in 1902. It scored numerous racing successes, and on May 1902, William K. Vanderbilt established a world record of 111.1 kilometers an hour at its wheel. It looks fantastic here, demonstrating its heritage and performance, 99 years after it was first seen on these streets. Meanwhile, I was about to take part in my own little piece of driving history. Isn't it funny how the arrival of photography, for instance, coincided almost exactly with the arrival of the first mucky photograph, and the arrival of a car coincided almost exactly with the arrival of the first car race. Well, it's not a race as such, but more of a rally. Mercedes had brought together over 25 of their most beautiful vintage cars to take part and to drive some of the routes driven by Jelinek. Though no one had discussed the rules with me, well, it didn't really matter. I was just pleased to be taking part in this slice of Mercedes history. Well, that's the 10-second mark. Passed as we get ready to start on my own little race. Well, more of a rally, really. 4-3. My rather more sedate steed. I don't think a racing start would be appropriate. Coming through. So it was off into the hills for us. Meanwhile, back in the square, things were moving on apace. The SSK, seen here around the streets of Monte Carlo, was developed in 1930. It has over 7 litres and develops 300 horsepower with a top speed of 193 kilometers an hour. Only 31 units of this model were ever made, which makes it an extremely rare and valuable car today. So some of the cars that Mercedes had gathered together from a different era were quaint. Then we entered a period in time when they looked quaint, but really they weren't, because things in racing cars were getting pretty serious. 2 legendary cars of the late 30s were the W154 and the W165. 1938 saw the introduction of the 3-litre Formula Racing. Mercedes developed the W154, a V12 developing 430 horsepower. It scored major success in Tripoli and Libya, with Rudolf Caraccioli winning the 1938 European Champions title. Further success followed in 1939 for the improved W154, culminating in 3 titles: the European Championship, German Hill Climb and the German Road Race Championship. The W165 was created in just 8 months in answer to the lowering of the displacement limit from 3 litres to 1.5 litres at short notice for the Tripoli Grand Prix. Needless to say, the brand new W165 finished first and second under the Libyan palms. On another note, if you've ever wondered why Mercedes racing cars are silver, well, I can tell you. In 1934, a new weight formula came into force at 750 kilograms. The W25, despite its lightweight design, was still 1 kilogram above the limit, and technical modifications were impossible the night before the race. Alfred Neubauer, the racing manager, instructed his mechanics to scrape off the white paint from the aluminium bodywork. This did the job weight-wise, and the Silver Arrows legend was born. Glad they brought us out to Monte Carlo to do this and not at home in the UK, because the weather there is dreadful. It's not suitable for this sort of thing. The further up the hill we went, the worse the weather got. Rain and at the lunch stop, major snow. Things were fairly treacherous with a light foot on the pedal required to stop the back end from sliding out, but I suppose that's all part of the fun on a rally like this. Things were faring a little better back in the square though. Perhaps one of the most famous cars of the 1950s was the 300 SLR with start number 722, driven to victory in the Mille Miglia by Stirling Moss in 1955. The car covered the 1,600-kilometre course in just 10 hours, 7 minutes and 48 seconds at an average speed of 157.65 kilometres an hour, a record which amazingly remains unsurpassed to this day. However, by the end of 1955, Mercedes withdrew completely from motorsport, partly due to an accident at Le Mans, where a Mercedes catapulted into the crowds and killed several spectators. Although Mercedes-Benz had withdrawn from motorsport, their cars were still entered in rallies by private teams, and very successfully too. It wasn't until 1984 that Mercedes-Benz became actively involved in motorsport again, mainly in touring cars. There are a couple of nice examples here today of the 190e 2.3 16 DTM, built in 1988. Nicknamed the Baby Benz, it competed in virtually all heats of the German Rally Championship very successfully. A year later, the 190e 2.5 was developed. In touring car races, the car often emerged as the winner against tough competition from Audi, BMW and Opel. In 1991, the company clinched the manufacturer's title and the driver's runners-up title, while a year later they did even better, winning both titles. Anyway, back to my rally. If you'd been lucky enough to be wafting around the hills over Monte Carlo in the 60s, you might well have done it at the wheel of something like this. It's from 1965 and it's beautiful. It may be over 35 years old, but even today, it's a beautiful drive. It wafts along. Plenty of low-down power for that creamy, smooth, straight six up front. And up front, of course, that magnificent three-pointed star sweeping across the vista in front of you. This is a classic car that actually you really could live with. You'll pay a lot of money for a drop top like this, but a hardtop one, even in the UK, can be yours really for just a few grand. Worth thinking about. Well, they've saved the quickest to last. First up is the CLK-LM. The car, launched in 1998, surprisingly reached pole position in qualifying for the 24-hour race in Le Mans. Unfortunately, during the race, it was hampered by technical difficulties. It did, however, finish either second or third during the 8 races which counted towards the FIA GT Championship. Next up in the famous silver livery is the year 2000 450 horsepower Mercedes CLK-DTM. Bert Schneider secured the German championship virtually unchallenged with 221 points. Finally, there's this. Almost 40 years after its withdrawal from Formula One, Mercedes-Benz returned as an engine partner of Sauber. In 1994, Sauber departed, and McLaren and Mercedes became new partners in Formula One. The partnership has been very successful. 2 drivers' championships for 98 and 99, and a constructors' title in 98. Last year, Hakkinen came close again, only to be pipped by Ferrari. It's quite fitting to see both the oldest and newest Mercedes parading here together. Meanwhile, back to my rally. Unfortunately, we got stuck in traffic, but thankfully the weather improved sufficiently for all of the cars to finish without any mishaps. So we all arrived back safe and in one piece. I didn't qualify for any of the prizes though, not one. Well, we may not have had quite the pace on our little jaunt into the hills that we saw from the guys playing in the centre of town, but the experience has taught me one thing, and that's to have a little bit of respect for these old buses, because they might be old and dainty and graceful, but they can still hack it out on the road. Thank you.